Good afternoon or morning, depending on where you are. I am Jill Westring and Lucy.
Yes, hello.
Hi, Lucy. And we are going to be discussing, just as Megan has said, some of the, if you, next slide, please. Some of the common challenges that we face when we're talking about rights. We know that people exercising rights is so important and so vast that we sometimes we are challenged with helping people understand them, as well as helping people, those of us doing the interviews and decision making, using the POMS tool, which we of course know is valid and reliable. So we're trying to make this a beginning of where we can get some more consistency in what we're doing and make sure that we're reliable in what we are deciding with people and asking. So today we only have time to focus on some, obviously not all areas of rights, but we will be doing future webinars and that will dive into other components of this outcome. These are the areas we'll cover today. As I said, there are 11. This is not an exhaustive list. There are many, many other rights, and CQL is well aware of the vastness of this area. With data that Lucy and I have collected over the past few months and from internal discussions and polling, we are going to focus on these 11 areas as a beginning to try to clarify some of the challenges we as interviewers, trainers, facilitators face, thus increasing our consistency with the people we interview and decision making. As CQL responds to the increasing desires of people supported to be able to exercise inalienable rights and regain personal and civil legal rights, we begin. We're going to talk about voting, and we have a little scenario here to just start. We're not going to poll with you all, but keep in mind that given this information, and we know there's always more information to glean, and this is very short, but just as a beginning, that we say, this person, I have a court-appointed guardian. I want to vote. My guardian told me that I could not. My staff told me that if my guardian said I could not vote, then I cannot, even though voting is not specified in guardianship paperwork, period. So thinking of that, would the rights outcome be present and would the support be present? Knowing that guardianship is a huge area, that we must know what guardianship status is for each person that we support, including what is in the actual court papers and what they specify. We want to, advocacy is a huge area when it comes to guardianship or all rights, and it's advocacy with the person, advocacy for the person, and advocacy by the Human Rights Committee, which is one of the areas that many providers use as their due process. And so with that being said, further advocacy efforts might go beyond the internal HRC that is made up of members of the community as well as employees, but going on to state advocacy also. So with the outcome was adequate due process provided. There is a court-appointed guardian. However, I want to vote. For each of the rights, and we are on page 29 we look at the due process procedures on page 29 in the POM manual, and page 31, which are the decision-making questions, which are up on the webinar or on the PowerPoint. For each of the rights the person does not exercise, who most limits their ability to exercise each of these rights? Then for each of those rights the person does not exercise was adequate due process provided. Although it does not state specifically in the court papers, it is a plenary guardianship, which many times is considered for all decisions for that person and are made by the legal representative. Also, if the person feels this is a rights restriction, then it is. as they are not able to perform their rights to vote. The outcome for this particular person would not be present, even though there is a court-appointed guardian. And that goes into the next slide, please, which is about those supports. So was the person provided with the support needed to exercise his or her rights? My staff told me if my guardian said no, then I cannot, even though voting is not specified in that paperwork. So are the person's preferences and desires about the exercise of rights solicited by the information, by the organization? Yes, they know. Have the rights that are important to the person been identified? Or are there efforts being made? Yes, they know. Is the person provided with the support needed to exercise his or her rights? That is a no when we look at the advocacy issues. Now, we know that the fair and impartial hearing was not present outside of the court-appointed guardian. Typically, that is accomplished by the person attending and a grievance procedure for a restriction. Now, we know that there are many different things, different judges, different paperwork, different states. The issue here is that advocacy efforts were not supported as the staff were under the assumption that plenary guardianship allows for all decision-making. So you will see in all of these that technology, due process, and restoration plans, if there is a restriction, will be seen on each and every slide. We did that intentionally because it is so important to the robustness of understanding what people want regarding their rights in each and every one. And it is an underutilized, there are underutilized questions and answers within those due process and restrictions that we end up not having a very robust decision making because it is so big when it comes to this. So we must know if politics are important to the person. That means we've talked to them, we've asked, we've said, do you have this? What do you want? We've identified priorities and having those supports that are robust. Education leads to informed personal choice. And this is very specific that the person and the legally authorized representative, if there is one, have to give conformed consent, and that's by both parties. So there would be a discussion, there should be a give and take, a consent to agreement in something. Again, using that technology for education or voting or understanding, and then due process if there is a restriction, which it had not gone through. We're going to talk about voice and opinion. Voicing an opinion is that, oops, sorry, 1 second. The education on rights of free speech without fear of retribution or get into trouble. I don't know how many times I ask people, well, what would happen if you said you didn't like that? And they say to me, I would get into trouble. I then follow up with, well, what does that mean? What does getting into trouble mean? And although not everyone can actually give me a specific, I have heard everything from, I won't be able to go out this weekend, to staff will be mad at me, or someone will be mad at me, or I don't want to get someone else into trouble, not only myself. No intrusions or restrictions on ability to communicate opinions. And education leads to informed personal choice, especially with people who don't use words to communicate, use some sort of technology for that communication. We need to make sure those platforms and devices are available to the person. How do I communicate my grievance of something or my displeasure in something? And then if there is a restriction, of course, to have a restoration plan. And how to communicate choices. We continue to talk about everything from where I can eat, maybe the kitchen only, to house rules, perhaps lights out. Everything regarding the rights we are talking about today People should have a process to communicate and voice their opinion. Personal freedoms. We talk about personal freedoms as though everyone has them in their lives. To talk about what is personal, of affecting or belonging to a particular person rather than to anyone else. And freedom is the power or right to act, speak, or think as one wants without hindrance or restraint. With legal representation, plenary guardianship, power of attorney, and so forth, not everyone actually realizes personal freedoms. Personal, your own, it's nobody else's. And freedoms, of course, we have laws that prohibit certain freedoms. An example would be a seatbelt. They are the law. You're supposed to wear them. However, not everyone wears them every time they are in a car. There are consequences if caught, right? We have speed limits, consequences if caught. Those are some natural consequences. It seems, though, that what we find are that the consequences for people receiving supports that are not laws, but perhaps only rules, written or presumed rules, are those personal freedoms are not exercised. The education about personal freedoms leads to informed personal choice. Again, we must know how each person defines those, which means we have to be pretty well versed in it. Knowing what the technology and communication platforms, again, and devices are accessible to people, if there is a restriction, the due process and participation in the Human Rights Committee process, and have a restoration plan. A religion belief or non-belief, spirituality or doctrines of a religion come into play when we're practicing our religion. Informed personal choice, understanding what people want, faith, a complete trust or confidence in someone or something, a belief and accept something is true and feeling sure of the truth of that. We must have acceptance of people's personal belief systems, and that is ultimate in ascertaining if this is in place for everyone. To that end, we must know what people want and how to support that desire. People have the right to take part in activities associated with their personal beliefs, know their definitions of their religious preference or not, have the right to be supported in that association or not, that technology is being used. We have COVID, communication platforms and devices when churches are not open, or mosques or synagogues. And how are we using that to keep people a part of their choice in religion? If there is a restriction, and that may be presumed restriction, we only go to a certain church as in congregate settings, or I can only go to a certain synagogue because the person that is my support person uses that form of religion. And that we ensure that any restriction is temporary and that we know and support people within their religious beliefs. We talk about education as a right, and it is a right, but it is more than just going to school. Many people consider themselves lifelong learners, which can mean very different things to each of us. And that's outside of learning daily chores or daily routines or cleaning. Education is an enlightening experience, not just classrooms and textbooks. It's about experiencing life, exposing ourselves to new activities, new ways of thinking, weighing new ideas, and choosing what's best for us. It shall be directed to the full development of human personality and to the strengthening of respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. We must know how each person defines educational preferences, The organization must provide education on rights, including the ability to consent or dissent, and that leads to informed personal choice. Education can come in the forms of using technology. Again, communication platforms and devices are accessible to people. If there are restrictions on those communication platforms or devices, that there is a fair and impartial hearing, which includes participation in the HRC process, Human Rights Committee, and that there is a restoration plan in place if there is such a restriction. And now we talk about privacy. Privacy is your right. People who receive supports are not always guaranteed this right. Please think of all the privacy you have in your own lives. Relationships and children are a choice, I must say. So the privacy you have and all that you may expect or that you do expect. We have many differences in how much privacy we want or how little privacy we need or care about. Some people need a great deal, some don't need so much. So I have just a couple questions to think on. Are you okay with people just dropping by your house to see you? Or do you want them to let you know prior to them coming? That's a right. That's a personal freedom also that you must be able to communicate to those people that might be visiting. Do you expect repairs in your home to be done when you are present? Does that always happen to the people that we support? Do you set the times for those repairs to be completed? And would you consider a camera in your home to be okay? Do you have keys to your home and choose who else may have a key? Now we know that in rental properties, the landlord has one, but the landlord is supposed to give you 24-hour notice before ever entering your residence or your apartment or your home. So privacy is the state or condition of being free from being observed or disturbed by other people. It's the state of being free from public attention. We must know how each person defines privacy. Cameras are a huge intrusion into people's lives. They're not there for safety or for staff convenience or to catch staff. Entering people's homes and private bedrooms. Education about what privacy is, leading to informed personal choice of what I prefer. That we use our technology, those platforms and devices are accessible. If there are restrictions, is there a fair and impartial hearing? Our due process, participating in the HRC process, and that a restriction is temporary with a restoration plan in action. Lucy will take over now.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Lucy Clem. The next rights decision-making area that we will be presenting on is locks, and it bridges from privacy to what we're talking about now. Locks fall under rights because we must know how each person determines who has access and when access is permitted. That is a right, and access is essential. Locked areas and objects must be accessible as desired. So not just bedroom keys, the front door, but supplies, closets, medications, and money. We'll be covering access within rights over the next few topics, but we must first consider if there are barriers to what someone wants or needs. If there is, then one must ask if there is a key, is there a code, and how do I exercise that right fully? We must know how each person determines who has access and when that access is permitted. And if somebody wants a locked area, that they are accessible as desired. Education leads to informed personal choice. With respect to decision making, and knowing whether the outcome is present. Questions such as, do I know what locks exist within and outside my home? Do I know how to use a key, or would more accessible locking mechanisms be helpful to exercise my right? Do I know why the area is locked? Do I have an opportunity to exercise my right to full access by eliminating the need for a locked area? Also, am I okay with locked areas if I have a key or a point of access? These are questions to consider because it is my right to lock the door to my bedroom, but it's also my right to have access to the medication when I choose. If that is not available, then we must explore why. Thinking about technology, there are numerous integrative opportunities for outcomes and supports to fully exercise this area of rights. There are facial and voice identifiers, fingerprints, and multiple smart home avenues to explore to fully exercise this right. Any locked area in a home is considered a restriction. I mentioned rooms, but medication cabinets, money boxes, food pantries, supply closets, or anything else must be considered if there's that barrier to access and a lock is present. If locks are present, then the opportunity for access must be restored. There are numerous creative options to explore and new ones being generated all the time. That's part of support to consider access and continue that ongoing exploration. Locks should be reviewed as part of the Human Rights Committee and that due process. The review should include any restrictions that may belong to people I live with as well. With respect to support, one must ask if the review and participation in the Human Rights Committee is available for that locked review that may affect me or the people I live with. If I don't agree, I have the right for that review and due process procedures. Supporting someone to fully exercise their rights within the area of locks includes those considerations as well as individual preferences. Now I want to go through a decision-making example highlighting the right to access while considering a midnight snack. I am 37 years old. I live with 3 people in our home that we rent. We have overnight support staff, and I am on a chosen diet that I picked where I monitor my calories through an app on my phone. During the night, sometimes I want a midnight snack. I can have access to the kitchen, refrigerator, and pantry at my own choosing. When the weekend overnight staff works, the staff reminds me of my calorie intake and encourages a healthy choice, but no direction is given on what I must choose for my midnight snack. So would the rights outcome be present, and would the rights support be present? And returning to our personal outcome measures manual, thinking about due process. Was adequate due process provided? The consideration here is there are no restrictions on diet. There are no restrictions on access to the refrigerator, pantry, or kitchen. Looking at 5.2, for each of the rights the person does not exercise, who most limits their ability to exercise each of these rights? And under 5.3, for each of the rights the person does not exercise, was adequate due process provided? Since no one is limiting this rights area and there is full access, no restrictions are in place, the rights outcome would be present and access to food is available. Next slide, looking at support. Was the person provided with the support needed to exercise his or her rights? Keep in mind, there were no restrictions on access to food. Considering the decision-making questions, are the person's preferences and desires about the exercise of rights solicited by the organization? Have the rights that are important to the person been identified, Or are there efforts being made to learn about the person's preferences? Is the person provided with the support needed to exercise his or her rights? So would the rights support area be present? Yes. Recognition of access to food is available. The preferences are known by the staff that the person is watching their diet through an app, and this is not a restriction. They know what the person's preferences are, and they're supporting them to exercise that right fully. If there were dietary restrictions, locked pantries or kitchen areas, and the staff refused to support the person with this desire for their midnight snack, then due process restoration and consideration of access opportunities through supports must exist for the support area to be present, thus enhancing quality of life in this outcome area. Continuing from our example, the next decision-making area within people exercise rights is access to food. We must know how each person defines access to food. Full access. For some people, it is knowing they can have a midnight snack. For others, it is the ability to cook and prepare foods of their own choice. If there is a menu, are choices given in preparing what that looks like, and am I involved in the menu planning, grocery shopping, and meal preparation? Again, we must know how each person defines access to food as a right. I must be able to define what that access looks like for myself, and I need to know what it looks like for others I may live with. Therefore, I would know if there's any limitations on full access. A consideration is for adults over 21. This also includes the opportunity to have alcoholic beverages, including a glass of wine. Once again, education leads to informed personal choice. This may include exploring menu options. This may include learning about other cultures and learning how to cook. This also means eating breakfast when I want and having a cup of coffee before my housemates wake up. Exposure to a variety of food and drink options and access points is key. Technology can certainly assist with access to food through meal planning, online shopping, and access through any locked areas, as I mentioned before. Finding ways to communicate preferences through communication devices is also essential when it comes to access to food. Finding out through questions leads to understanding of preferences, and technology can assist with a variety of topics, a variety of questions, and tons of YouTube videos to explore educational opportunities around this area that would meet the needs across a variety of communication platforms. As with the previous example, any area locked is considered a restriction. If the kitchen, refrigerator, or pantry are locked, that is a restriction that must be reviewed with proper due process, including participation and review in a human rights committee. If I do not have access to food or drinks of my choosing, not only what I want, but when I want, then a restoration plan must exist to exercise my right to access food. This may include a key, areas where I keep preferred food choices, or the ability to have the full opportunity to access upon request, say by asking for a key from the staff with that responsibility. Another consideration within access to food is recognizing that there may be house rules or times where certain things may not be formally locked with a key or a code, but they are those presumed restrictions surrounding house rules that may just have come to fruition over time. That's something to keep in mind within this rights area. Access to money is a right, and it is our next decision-making area. Within this decision-making area, there are 4 key concepts: obtain, examine, retrieve, and acquire. Do I have access to obtain money? Can I get it from my wallet, from my purse, or is it locked up? Do I have the money in the form of cash or a bank account with a bank card? That's part of preference. I need to know how I want my money kept. Do I have access to examine my money? Do I have a login for my bank account? Do bank statements come to my home with my address listed? Can I retrieve my money when I choose? Can I access an ATM, or can I go to the bank when I desire? These are some of the things to kind of think about when you're asking those questions surrounding the recognition of access to money. Also think about if there are dedicated days for something like grocery shopping, banking, etc. Joe mentioned presumed restrictions. Does that promote full access? Yes, if it is designed through education and experience, and it's based on what I want. It's my definition. No, if it's a structure limiting my right to schedule design and comes out of an outside convenience. Next, can I acquire money on my own? Can I access a paycheck? Considering these 4 parameters, we must know how each person defines finances and money as a right. It begins with access and furthers understanding through education. Access to money and experiences with money have lots of learning opportunities tied to understanding with technology. Because there's a lot of technology that can assist with banking, budgeting, and protecting money, it is important to include the person receiving supports in that process. There are applications and cash sharing options that enhance access when these opportunities are given to people. Access to money is a right, and one of the most common areas of discussion surrounding people exercise rights, and this particular rights area focuses on representative payee. Representative payee is a restriction. It is a restriction because there is a barrier to accessing money. The opportunity for review and restoration of that right, whether it is through representative payee or another hurdle, must have due process, including participation in the Human Rights Committee and knowing a restoration plan is in place. Participating in that due process is also a component in education. With the representative payee, restoration plan should promote educational opportunities, experiences, budgeting practices, and utilization of technology to ensure full access to money and the outcome and supports in place surrounding this particular area under people exercise rights. Representative payee has a level of scrutiny from a government perspective, but in terms of outcomes and supports, promoting access and full restoration recognizes quality of life and quality of supports in this area of accessing money. It is personal, and empowering the person receiving supports to be involved and make decisions around this process is especially important. The next rights decision-making area that falls under people exercise rights ensures the right to have visitors at any time. The expectation that people can have visitors at any time furthers access because I am demonstrating my right to have people in my home when I want. Not only do I have access, but I am extending that access. In reference to the home and community-based services setting rule, this area furthers the expectation that people can optimize individual initiative, autonomy, and independence in making life choices. Therefore, we must know the desires of each person. Does someone want their significant other to come over for dinner? Does someone want a spot outside to have a cup of coffee with a friend? Do I like being able to communicate online? Address ownership is key. For someone to have been visitors at any time, they must feel that their address reflects their home. While they may rent a home or live in a setting with some rules or barriers, the expectation of an agency must not limit how one sees their extension of access. Therefore, not only is it about address ownership of one's environment, but again, how you can extend that invite to others, and recognizing hospitality comes from the person that lives in the home. Education leads to informed choice. How do I know what it means to have a visitor? Are there visitation policies that I am part of developing? Is there agreement if I do live with housemates what having visitors means? Technology, especially today, can enhance the visitor experience and further the concept around people feeling welcome in their home, assisting with choices, invitations, and the hospitality component optimizes individual initiative, autonomy, and independence. Restrictions surrounding visitors must have the same scrutiny as other access areas. It is important to ensure due process. It is essential that I'm invited to review the restriction and participate in the due process hearing, whether it's through the Human Rights Committee or another avenue, if someone I want to come over is not allowed. The organization assures that these restrictions are temporary. The next area we'll be covering is access to move about the community. To know whether this rights area is present, we must know how each person defines their community. It is their right to access and determine how much access they want. Some may like to experience the places they know and love, while others may like to try new things. It is their respective definition that begins with access and must be shared to those that are important to that person. Because the right to move about the community starts with access, transportation needs and supports must be in place. If I'm not able to exercise my right due to barriers of transportation, then access, thus the right's outcome, is not in place. Another consideration within this area is non-work activities integrated into community settings for the period designed by the person. This moves into participation in the life of the community with type and frequency, but the foundation of access must exist as a rights area. It is a right. Education leads to informed personal choice. Sharing information on what exists, learning through experiences, and finding the places one prefers anchors personal choice when considering where one wants to go. Technology can enhance access to the community with adaptive equipment, applications that share information, applications that increase access through transportation, and the utilization of communication and platforms should promote access as an indicator of supports through choices in where you want to go and learning about new things. With respect to restrictions, if one does not have access to move about the community, then due process, including the fair and impartial hearing, which may include participation in a Human Rights Committee, must occur. Speaking toward limited community access can be powerful and an agent of change in systems and practices that will enhance quality in life. Support should ensure that any restriction is temporary and that restoration plan is active. The Home and Community-Based Services Settings Rule highlights key access and rights areas as well. In terms of decision-making, there are important areas that further access towards the rights areas mentioned today. First, a lease or other legally enforceable agreements to protect from eviction, as Jill mentions, recognizes the ability to decide access points in one's home, including for food, visitors, locks, and personal freedoms. Second, as Jill mentioned with privacy, privacy in your unit or your home includes entrances lockable by the individual. Again, necessary staff may have keys as needed, but again, the lock belongs to me and I know why the lock exists and I know how to access beyond that lock when I choose. It is important to recognize again the role technology can have as an access gateway for the person, recognizing the outcome and enhancement of privacy as an area of support. Thirdly, choice of roommates, housemates, visitors, all are empowered by the right to personal freedoms and choice to decide where you live and who you live with. This is furthered by the decision to furnish and decorate one's unit, home, or environment and highlight the right to self-expression. Next, the home and community-based services settings rule recognizes the right to control my own schedule and activities. This furthers access and highlights the ability to move about the community. It also sets the foundation that I have the right to make those decisions. As it relates to access, again, we have mentioned decision-making areas surrounding rights includes access to food at any time. Having visitors of my own choosing with physical accessibility. Any restrictions based on these areas do not comply with the home and community-based services settings rule. One reference area for more information is the Anchor Toolkit for exploratory questions that may help you to know whether the outcome and supports are present in ensuring access during the personal outcome measures conversation. Again, keeping in mind the role education, the role technology, and the role the restoration plan through any restriction can help empower and fully realize access to people, ensuring they have full exercise of their rights. As we conclude this webinar on people exercise rights and respective areas to consider for decision-making under this personal outcome measures area, we wanted to let you know that there will be more to come. The next webinar will cover people are treated fairly, and we hope you're able to begin recognizing the difference between these two outcome areas by knowing the key areas that fall under rights and respectively people are treated fairly, in hopes that it promotes consistent decisions, that it enhances understanding of due process, increases areas of agreement, and it allows all of us to better know whether the outcome is present. Jill and I look forward to future training surrounding rights decision-making and hope to see you for the next webinar topic surrounding people are treated fairly as well. If you have any questions, do not hesitate to reach out to Jill or myself. Our contact information is included on this slide.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm back. Hi there. We have
a couple questions. First question is, do you have any recommendations or general tips for states that do not have human rights committees, i.e. California?
even though it might not be let me think for 1 second. Even though it might not be a requirement for an organization, there should be some sort of due process advocacy avenue for anyone who disagrees or has a grievance regarding any restrictions. Lucy, anything else?
Yeah, I think that's where the restoration component comes into play. So if there is a barrier, it's really taking the time to think about what opportunities or resources or tools can help reduce or eliminate that barrier.
Any others, Megan?
We have a couple questions that relate to COVID-19. Stacy asks, are some of these rights not affected by COVID-19, i.e. visitors?
Yes. In terms of, I think we can think about moving about the community and visitors. For people receiving services, and if there are expectations and visitors policies in place from a provider or a decision from housemates that they've come to the conclusion that we don't want people coming in and out of our home outside of the preferred staff, those things need to have that open dialogue and conversation with the people that are receiving services, so they understand why that right might be limited at this time. The goal is that there's full understanding that they are coming to that decision on their own, and the educational resources are present so that visuals or different experiences or videos can really help educate on why that restriction might be in place at this time. Again, I will always emphasize with COVID-19 that the restriction is temporary. And even if there are visitor policies in place, that is a restriction, but it's again thinking about how can we restore that? How can we, like Jill gave the example with church, how can we provide experiences or restoration of life outside of COVID at this time?
And there was another question, as church is mostly online, is the agency obligated to purchase devices for the individual to participate online?
There are different things that are going on in different states, such as New Mexico is now requiring or going to be requiring that Wi-Fi is an essential part of a home, like electricity. And so that is going to be going into effect fairly soon, if not already in place.
In terms of supports, it's finding ways to make that happen. Like Jill said, different states have different requirements. But as the support, looking at the supports areas within the personal outcome measures, I have to know you have to know the definition of the person supported first. So if that's something that they want, it could be reaching out to that church and seeing if anybody would be open to donating, or finding other ways that if the agency doesn't have the ability to do that, reaching out and seeing, really using that social capital to see if that opportunity is available.
Great, thank you. And then there's one more question, and it was a little bit longer, so I'll try to kind of summarize it. So based on your presentation, if you were to apply it for someone who has higher support needs, let's say they want to eat a lot of sweets, how would you go about that process as far as educating and going through that process of working with them on their rights?
The supports are there. We may not always, and we may never make sure that somebody completely understands. What we want to make sure of is that there's as much informed consent, that we have educated and educated and educated. Because I tell you, I know people, my friends who have diabetes and kind of fall off the wagon, if you will, now and then. And it is just really, again, just supporting and educating people. If it becomes a restriction due to a doctor, or that it could cause great harm, that still needs to go into the due process and continuing always to educate.
Great, perfect. And another question. Oh, I'm sorry, Lucy, did you have something else?
No, I was just going to say, well, there's, that's where the supports come into play, to really think about different visuals or explanations or stories or scenarios to kind of walk through those experiences. And if there is that restriction, the process of restoration is not a, I like to use the example, it's not an on and off switch. Dimmer, and how can we grow and how can we expand that rights area over time.
And what can we find for different sweet snacks? Is it peanut butter, and can they have that? Because that sweetens. Can they make things with applesauce instead of sugar? You know, there's just lots of different ways to try to help people do that.
Excellent. And one more question. You spoke about cameras for residential homes that already have cameras. Would there be a need for the organization to show that there's consent from those who are receiving services and living there?
The simple answer is yes.
Yeah.
The complicated answer is we would want to know absolutely where that informed consent is, what education, where they are, how often are they used, and most importantly, why.
Mm-hmm. And that it's a regular review, that it's an ongoing review, because cameras can be installed and the people that may have needed it to at one period of time or another may not continue to live there. So just because they exist doesn't mean they should be in place forever.
So go ahead.
I just want to answer one more thing or talk about COVID makes everybody unhappy. So, you know, there are some limits, but outcomes and supports is where it really comes in, because outcomes, you know, if everybody's trying to be safe, and limiting to communities if it is a state, local, citywide neighborhood, you know, that's what we go with. So if people know there is potential risk and exposure risk, I mean, it all becomes very dicey. It's all very personal. And again, the supports need to be in place.
And so that is all we have for questions for today. I'd want to take a moment to thank Jill and Lucy for their presentation and thank all the attendees for joining us today. As they had mentioned, we will have future webinars as part of this Personal Outcome Measures indicator series, and we'll be sharing more information with all of you at a future date about when those next webinars will occur. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.